Hello everyone. This is the start to the graffiti introduction video and a short how-to. But before we get started, let's take a look at a reminder about the level of work required in this class and what the expectations are. The HSU website states that there should be about 2 hours for every unit of class. However, in an online format, since we don't meet as a regular group, we can make that a 3 hours per unit outside of class since there is no class. So let's take a look at simple math. 3 hours times 3 units times 3 hours per week is 9 hours for a 16-week course. However, we only meet for 8 weeks, which means that it could be expected that up to 18 hours of work per week would be expected in this course. However, I've planned it so that between 12 and 16 would be an appropriate amount of work per week for an A. So take that into account as we move forward, especially as we get towards week 7 and 8, where you'll be working on your research project as well. I know that some people don't want an A in this class. That's totally fine with me. Whatever you want to get as your grade, please achieve that. That being said, don't get behind on work. Make sure that you've got great things in for grading by Monday and Wednesday, so that I can get those things done. Most assignments are accepted up to a week late with a 10% penalty. The only exceptions to that are anything due during week 8 and anything having to do with the research project. Again, just looking at our breakdown of how things are scored in this class, there are 4 main items. The sketchbook journal, that's your art project, is a quarter of your score. The discussion forums and the art explorations are another 25% of your score. The art critique forum is one of those things that can get overlooked in this class, but again, a quarter of your score. And then finally, the research project, which we'll get to starting week 5 and will be due in week 7.5 and 8.5, is another quarter of your score. Let's move on. Looking at this idea of graffiti. Graffiti is something that we see all over the place. It can be very simple looking, but it's also culturally complex. There's a lot going on in graffiti. One of my favorite comics for graffiti is this one here. The reason I like this comic is because it allows us to see that everyone approaches graffiti in their own way. There is no one right way to do graffiti. There's no rules. That's one of the things that's really fascinating to me about graffiti. And I think that everybody in this class is going to have their own approach to it. But there's also some conventions that we can look at too. This picture, aside from being pretty funny, I think is another good example of the importance of graffiti in context. If we remove graffiti from the street, it really takes a lot out of the way that graffiti lives and breathes when it's in its natural environment. And the natural environment for graffiti is on the street, in public, on an unprotected surface. Anytime we remove it from that context, we start to remove some of the fascinating levels of graffiti. In this class, we're going to be doing graffiti on paper, which is equally as cool, but it's still not the same thing as being out in the environment and experiencing it and making graffiti yourself. I personally don't make graffiti, but I do go and appreciate it as much as I can. Let's take a look at some of the terminology. On the upper left-hand side, you'll see tags. These are a scribble that is somewhat of a signature, and they're very stylized, as most letters in graffiti are, but it's just one single line. This group of tags was done partially by Twist, who's also known as Barry McGee, whose video you're going to watch this week. On the right-hand side, up in the top, you'll see a throwy. A throwy is sort of like the next progression. Some people start with tags and never move on. Other people want to get bigger, so they go to throwies. Throwies are done very quickly. In this case, the white background was done first. It was sprayed in really quickly with a white spray can, and then the person went in and added the black outlines. Overall, this throwy probably took, I don't know, 2 minutes to put up, and you can see kind of a little tag right next to it. On the bottom, this is a piece. This is short for a masterpiece. I took this picture behind the Eureka Mall. The artist's name is Demise. He's killing it lately here in the local area. And pieces are the most highly developed forms of graffiti. Not every graffiti writer is seeking to become someone who makes pieces. However, most people who are into graffiti would consider them to be sort of the highest achievement in graffiti. So those are the things we're going to look at this week, and those are the things I want you to try and create on paper. This is an example of somebody doing two different styles. This artist's name is Scape. He's from Germany. These are pictures from, again, behind the Eureka Mall. And in this case, the artist has done very similar letters in both cases, but slightly different. I highly recommend that you download the PowerPoint at the bottom of this week's topic so that you can examine these in a little bit closer detail and spend more time looking at the similarities and differences between these two pieces. Recor is another person who's giving us a great example of two different ways to approach the same letters. So while these letters are the same name in both cases, it's clearly very different. Finally, another example, and this one from Dondi, and Dondi is one of the premier graffiti writers of the early 80s, one of the first ones to become really famous, put his work into galleries and so on. On the top you can see his full train car, which was quite an achievement back in the day for an artist to have that much quality work across the entire body of a train. Shows a significant level of commitment and skill. On the bottom we see one that he did on a wall, and again just sort of reinforcing the differences between his letter styles, and also that artists who do graffiti can do many different types of those letter styles, not always the same kind. Some things we're going to talk about when we're looking at letter construction is bars. Bars are the basic building blocks of letters, and we'll get to those in just a second. Serifs are those things that connect one letter to another in a very small way. If you look at Times New Roman, for example, on your word processor, you'll notice there's those little feet that kind of stick off the edge of each letter. If you look at Arial, that's a sans serif type, and the letters just simply end. There's no little curly cues on the edges. Those curly cues help our eyes in reading one thing to another, and they can also be decorative, as in graffiti. Bits are those things that sort of stick off of letters. Record does a good job here with his bits. He's got a couple bits sticking off here. Extensions are where one letter moves into another. Let's see, we'll go to Dondi. Dondi has an extension at the bottom of his D down here. And that's also kind of a connector because it's connecting to the I in his letters as well. There's a break. We'll look at that next. But breaks, see how there's a break between the I and the D here. And the letter is actually broken. Up here, the N has a crack in it. Just adding some of that visual texture. So we looked at extensions and breaks. Arrows are something you're always going to see in graffiti. They help to add defense to your piece. They look cool, and there's something that is going to just give your piece that much more of a graffiti feel. 3D and shadow work are ways to make your work look like it's coming out of the page or off of the wall. 3D is going to make it go back into space. Shadows are going to make it look like it's kind of floating on the surface of the wall. Definitely check out the web. There's lots of tutorials out there on how to create these different pieces within the work that you're going to do. But in short, start with a sketch. Just really quickly get the letters down. Then start manipulating those letters like I'm going to show you in just a second. Then with your color, start working with big blocks of color, then little blocks of color over those. Finally, your outlines are going to be the very last thing. If you try to do thick black outlines and then fill in your letters and avoid hitting those black outlines, you're going to drive yourself crazy. So put the big blocks of color down first, then little blocks, and then finally those thick outlines around every single letter. Don't forget a symbol of place. That's one of the requirements of this project in Art 100 specifically. Okay, so the first thing you're going to want to do if you need help building your block letters is write your word or name in single line letters. Then break those lines out. This is an example of the bars that we're talking about when we're looking at letter construction. So for example, K has 3 bars, E has 4, and N has 3 again. Then draw a bar around each letter. So here's my example of a bar drawn around each letter. Remove those inside lines and you're left with those bars. And then finally, remove all those little lines in between all the bars so that you get a block letter. I've put this up on Moodle as well. This is a graffiti progression example, and this is one of the best ones I've seen where two of these words are made into a piece. And I would recommend studying this as you're making your own to try and get your letters to look more like graffiti. Notice these aren't bubble letters that people are doing. These are regular block style letters that are being manipulated into someone's own personal style and twisted and slightly modified. The one on the left is highly modified, the one on the right isn't quite so modified. I would expect that people in this class are going to get at least to the level 3 here. I don't need to see the progression that you've done necessarily, but I would hope that you were able to move your letters beyond just a simple block letter into decorating and adding those little things that we talked about here in this video. Finally, here's my piece that I did for this class. This is about a level 3, I would say, on those progressions we just saw. And you can see where I've done big fields of yellow. Then I did those little blue chunks inside the yellow. I did purple with green on the background. And the last thing I did was outline my letters with a Sharpie. And my symbol in here is a tree.